Light swords could change Hema forever. If that line catched your attention, good. Now let me explain. Today's topic is a controversial one. Light swords in Hema. More specifically, light longswords. And not just a bit lighter, but swords that are shorter, lighter, and built with more flex. This debate has been around for some times. Some makers aim for the 1.6 kilogram range, others go closer to the 1.2 kilos. But what happens if you go even further? What if the sword becomes so light and flexible that it changes the way how people fence? That's where many of you will immediately think about the SIGI Lights. SIGI Forge introduced the SIGI Light roughly around 2 years ago and recently expanded the line with the new SIGI King Light. And yes, the first reaction to new ideas in Hema is usually this.
Good afternoon, sir. Could we interest you in some chocolate?
Chocolate? Did you say chocolate?
Yes, sir! With or without nuts.
Chocolate? Chocolate!
Plenty of people were against it, and also a lot of people were for it. The hardliners saw their fears confirmed. That's it. Now Hema turns into sports fencing. And I will be honest with you guys, I was one of those people. I really thought this direction would drag the scene away from what we are trying to be and brings us one step closer to sport fencing. But I need to be fair and only have an opinion on things I actually tried myself. So in this video I wanted to do something more useful than just shouting out my opinion without ever gave the SIGI Lights a try. I will go through the advantages and disadvantages of these swords, what they encouraged in training, what they punish, and if they quietly lead you into habits you don't notice until they show up in sparring. And I'm really interested in what you guys think, because this isn't just a gear discussion, it's a discussion about what we want Hema longsword to look like in the future. One transparency point before we start. I bought the SIGI Basic I show in this video by myself with my own money, but the SIGI King Light was provided by SIGI Forge, so the video is kind of a sponsored video. I have been working for a while now, mainly with the basic model. It's the lighter of the two lights and it handles very differently from a normal feather. Let me explain. When it comes to movement, the weapon weight makes biggest difference. I have noticed that the lighter the feather, the harder small precise movements become. For things like hand snipes, I miss a bit of weight that gives the weapon a certain stability. In comparison, the King Light feels way better because of this extra weight. So you see, with light swords you have to separate the weight and the flex instead of treating them as one. That's why throughout the video I will keep comparing the two models, so you understand there's no simple yes or no answer, but it's more of a spectrum. The bigger the movement, the more this issue disappears. Which brings me to what the lights are really good for. Anything that needs a certain level of intensity to work properly. Especially cuts like the Zornhau, the Schielhau, Zwerchhau, and thrusts of all kinds are great to practice. Especially when you want to train thrusting, these swords are amazing. Because of the high flex, you barely feel the thrust, which deletes a common problem. Anyone who drills longsword knows what it's like when you get hit in the same spot 10 times in a row. Even with protective gear, it can hurt.
Sorry.
And what happens is you start to overcompensate. And then your drill gets worse because your partner isn't getting the training impact they need for this exercise. With the lighter swords, this is less of a problem. And since I got the King Light, I also have more options to change the intensity of these drills. Because of the King Light is about 170 grams heavier than the basic model, it handles much better in small movements, which makes up for the basic model's weakness. But the trade-off is that thrusts start to feel a bit harder again. Another important point people often bring up is that the light swords mess up the technique, or that you will train bad habits. That hasn't been my experience so far. Quite the opposite actually. Because of the higher flex and the lower weight, I'm actually forced to execute the techniques much cleaner, because you have to pay more attention to the edge alignment. Otherwise, your cuts will get flat very quickly. And also, the lighter weapons give me the option to repeat the drills more often and also with a reduced risk of injuries. Overtraining has become more of a topic for me over the last 2 years. I've been dealing with a wrist injury for about a year and a half now, which made long, intense training sessions basically impossible. That's where the lights helped me a lot. The lower weight and the reduced resistance in the thrusts gave me the perfect opportunity to train during the recovery. With the basic model, I was able to get back into the training relatively quickly. And with the SIGI King Light, which is basically the middle step between a standard feather and the basic model, I also had a way to slowly work myself back towards a standard weighted feather. Especially the lower flex of the SIGI King Light was important to reduce the pressure on my wrist, while having a similar weight of a normal feather. But these swords aren't just good tools when you are already injured. They also help you prevent injuries in the first place. I'm mainly talking to people who train 3 to 5 times a week, or people who fight a lot of competition and still don't want to hold back in training. Lighter swords massively reduce the injury risk. I can do hard sparring with lights for 2 hours and take far fewer heavy hits than I would with normal feathers. If you only train once a week, that probably won't matter much. But if you train a lot and then travel to competition on the weekends, you will be happy not to show up with a body that is already beaten up. And as a coach, I will add this. Lights can be a great upgrade for you personally, because as I mentioned, the impact is much lower. It helps you when you have to act like a dummy for 2 hours straight without being covered in bruises by the end. Now I have said a lot of positive things about the lights so far, but do they have also downsides? Let's get to the black sheep of this discussion. Do we want light swords in tournaments, and do they even make sense there? To keep it short, I'm not a big fan of lights in tournament. I competed in an event where SIGI lights were used, and honestly, I feel like it affected the tournament in a negative way. Yes, fencers are better protected and the impact is reduced thanks to the lower weight and the higher flex, but in my view, there are 2 major drawbacks, plus one kind of a subjective issue I have that can make tournament fencing worse. Because the weapons are so fast, it becomes really hard for judges to see with the naked eye what actually happens. And more importantly, whether the cut had the required quality. The increased flex also means blades bend around parries even more than they already do. And you can even start throwing strikes on purpose that rely on the blade bending around the guard to create a hit. Sports fencing already shows where that leads, and it harms the sport in my opinion. I think swords shouldn't be used like a whip. It happened to me plenty of times that I got hit with a light, but my opponent said that they didn't even feel an impact. A big reason for that is that the blade snaps around the parry. We are seeing similar issues right now in saber tournaments, where very light weapons are allowed, sometimes with barely any defined edge at all, so the focus shifts toward pure touch rather than actually hit and hit quality. That said, I have to point out again that this is a spectrum. The SIGI King Light actually addresses a lot of these problems. Because of the extra weight, it feels much closer to a standard feather and the flex offers more resistance. Honestly, that might even make it useful for tournaments. The second drawback is something the King Light almost solves. The blade needs a certain stopping effect, and I think that matters if technique like the thrust, but also cuts like the Zornhau are supposed to function in a way that my opponent isn't able to fight back for a moment. Imagine a clean thrust to the arm, and your opponent isn't affected by it and continues his attack. Depending on the rule set, it can have different impacts, but a tournament where doubles or afterblows are counted, I need a kind of stopping mechanism that protects me when my technique hits. Same thing with the binds, parries or strikes to the blade. The lighter the blade gets, the less effect those actions have, and the line between flat and edge starts to blur. And this mechanism behind the flat and the edge in our sport is actually really important. In normal sparring, I could live with it, but in a competitive context, it's just frustrating. The last point I want to make is more like a subjective feeling of mine. I think that heavier weapons actually give better feedback in fencing. Hits feel cleaner and the fencing looks and feels more controlled. And honestly, I think our sport is actually fast enough already. Light weapons would push it into being faster than it needs to be. In my opinion, even spectators should be able to understand what's happening on the fencing ground, and this is actually already hard to see. That also includes having a real stopping effect, what I mentioned earlier, and that the strike should actually have an effect on your opponent, so an actual hit can prevent an afterblow. And yes, that opens up the whole discussion of how much force should matter in Hema, but that's a topic for another video. So if you don't want to miss that, drop a sub so you don't miss it. So as you can see, the SIGI Lights gave Hema a lot of new opportunities, and in my view it's absolutely an excellent training tool. Now the question is, which one is the right for you? Basically, both are great swords and work great for all kinds of drills and exercise. But if you're looking for a sword you can use for drills and regular sparring, I do recommend the SIGI King Light. It's excellent for all drills and honestly feels like a shorter feather. You don't even feel the flex that much when you swing it around. From my personal experience, I can already say that the SIGI King Light is one of my favorite swords, and it is the sword I mainly fence in training right now. So if you want a training tool with the fewest compromises possible, the SIGI King Light is the perfect choice. Also, if you want a detailed review about the SIGI King Light, go check out the video from Petrocek. He did an amazing job on the review. If you're thinking, I like the whole idea of the light blades and I want a solid training tool that also works for intense sparring with reduced injuries, then I can definitely recommend you the basic model. Just keep in mind, it's smarter to use the basic light against other lights, because otherwise they will get damaged faster, and with the bigger weight difference between a standard sword and the basic, some techniques start to lose their purpose. Either way, both are fantastic training tools and I do recommend them to any fencer. And I genuinely think they are changing the Hema scene for better.